Right, well, thank you very much. I'm sorry I missed some of the presentations today, but what I've heard has been absolutely fascinating. So, and I spoke to somebody as they were going out because they also had to leave early, and they were saying that they thought it had been a fantastic day. So thank you very much, Carolyn, and your organisers, Hayley and Michelle. So thank you, all of you, for doing that. So this, what we're looking at as the final presentation here, comes out of a 3-year project called Kent's Maritime Communities, circa 1350 to circa 1600. This project is funded by the Janus Foundation, and it was born out of the popular success of Maritime Kent through the ages. If you haven't bought it, you jolly well ought to have a copy, that's all I can say. And this edited collection and the potential collaboration that I was going to have with Dr. Craig Lambert and others from the universities of Southampton and Reading, because we were going to do an AHRC project on English Calais, which actually didn't come off. But what it did provide us with was knowledge that there were people in Kent who were really interested in the county's rich maritime heritage, and that we could work with individuals, groups and organisations who were happy to be partners in this sort of work, and that we could do what is called in the trade knowledge exchange, and that we could bring the knowledge that we got through the project to them, and we could do this through activities that would also offer research skills for those interested in history and heritage. In other words, we could be doing all this sort of outreach and impact work using the project as our sort of base knowledge. Now, as I said in the abstract when I sent that in, such activities in terms of this project were timetabled for the last 12 to 18 months. So that's not yet. But this summer, due to the generosity of some part of the organisation somewhere along the line, we have a great opportunity to try out some ideas in Dover, and that's what I'm going to be talking about now. So firstly, why Dover? Well, later medieval and the Tudor periods of Dover were particularly fascinating times for this cinque port and its history. Not only was the town one of the original head ports, just like New Romney, but by this period, those appointed to oversee Dover Castle as constable were also warden of the cinque ports. So it doesn't have the court of Brodhill, but what it does have is the court of St James. So in a sense, which was the sort of follow on from the court of Shepway. So it has that real strong link with the cinque ports as its entirety. So it's a fascinating town from that perspective. And moreover, the English, having captured Calais and subsequently garrisoning it, they basically turned it into English Calais. It was England overseas, which made it really, really important, particularly in terms of Dover, but other cinque ports as well. Because, of course, it was since a little island in France, so it needed support, it needed supplies from England of absolutely everything. You've also got the changing fortunes of the 100 Years' War that had an impact on Dover, whether we're talking provisioning that was going across, whether we're talking actual soldiers, although most of them were either going from Sandwich and then later Southampton. So the port's role was important as an entry and exit point for people, goods and ideas. And ideas are some of the most interesting things that pass through Dover both ways. And therefore, for the purposes of sort of outreach and impact, for Dover, we've got absolutely great material. And I should also point out that, of course, the good men of Dover were perfectly capable and did indeed get involved in privateering. You've also got that strong relationship between the town and the Crown, and as I was saying, relationships between the different Cinque Ports. So that's its history in the time of our project. It's also a very opportune period to be working on Dover and with Dover, because we, of course, and you've already heard from Martin, there's a fantastic Maison Dieu funded project, which is going to bring this fantastic historical building back into use as a key heritage asset. For those who haven't been to Dover, you really ought to, because it's got a fantastic Dover museum. And you've also got a fascinating survival in St Mary's Parish Church. It's the only parish church in Dover that's medieval survives, but it's a good one. So those are just a few of Dover's hidden treasures. But equally important are the people. And I'm just going to name a few of those that I've been fortunate to work with. And that's John Iverson, Keith Parfitt, Martin Crowther, and the Reverend Catherine. And there are a lot more as well, because you may not feel it when you actually walk through Dover, but there are a lot of people there that are really, really passionate about their town and about its historic buildings, and to put Dover back in many ways on the Kent heritage map. And it's that part, from my perspective, that I want to sort of explore, and it's aided by the fact that the Kent Maritime Communities Project also has two, not completely funded, but at least helped in terms of funding, 2 PhD students, one full-time, one part-time. And the full-time is Kieran Hoyle, who has recently started on her doctorate at Christ Church here, and she's investigating the Maison Dieu in the context of the town and crown in Tudor times. So, and she was also going to get involved in the outreach activities. So in many ways, that's the context. And it's now high time I went on to discuss what we'll be actually doing in Dover between Saturday the 8th of July and Tuesday the 18th of July. So for this 10-day period, there will be a temporary exhibition in St Mary's Parish Church entitled From Cradle to Grave, Living, Working and Dying in Late Medieval Dover. Now, Diane Heath told me that putting dying in the title was never a good thing, but I decided it needs dying, because dying is really important, especially if you're thinking about the people in the late medieval times and in Tudor times. So you're looking very much at that period going over the Reformation. So you're looking at the late medieval church, and then you're moving into the Protestant church. So dying does matter from that perspective. And Kieran and I will be devising our sort of pop-up exhibition, and we'll be using Dr. Diane Heath's design skills to actually put the designs together, her creative flair. And we have funding for our 6 pop-up banners under the headings that you can see on the slide here. You need to keep them short, so that's what I've done. And to go with the exhibition, we are holding 3 free afternoon workshops, although people will have to book because spaces will be limited, and I'm hoping that, well, I'm expecting a rush, but I'm hoping that we will at least fill them. And the idea is that we will be introducing people including Maison Dieu and other heritage volunteers from Dover and possibly more broadly to primary sources. And in particular, the reading of late medieval / Tudor handwriting. And I'm going to be sticking, the sort of documents I'm going to stick to are wills. And I'm going to be using only ones that are written in English. I am not expecting people to have an understanding of medieval Latin. And also, I want to, within these workshops, talk about how these sources might be used for research topics. Because wills have enormous potential, although it is important that my people, when we talk about them, are aware of the possible problems and limitations, as well as appreciating their value to explore such topics as familial, neighbourly and community relationships, piety and charity, and matters concerning property and occupation. So what I'm going to do within these 3-hour sessions, I hope will be interesting, useful, and above all enjoyable for participants, whether they have any knowledge beforehand or not. And that people will go away afterwards with having some knowledge and ideas, but wanting to do more, and potentially keen to get more engaged with the history and heritage around them. So for the remainder of this presentation, I want to give you an example of what one of the banners may include and an example of one of the wills I may use. So looking at trading mariners and merchants, one of the key factors is that coastal trading was as, if not more important, than overseas trade for those whose home port was Dover. Cargoes were taken to and brought from Kentish ports, including Sandwich, Hythe, and along the Thames estuary to Faversham and Milton next Gravesend, and up the Thames as far as London. Now, I've been doing some work with Maidstone Museum recently on the their medieval artifacts. One of the things that one of the curators said there was, what would you see as a strapline to sort of sum up Kent in the late medieval period? And what I would say is London's backyard. And it's extraordinarily true. And trade was therefore extremely important. However, Dover men also went to other parts of the British Isles. They are found loading and unloading cargoes at Rye and Shoreham in Sussex, further afield at Great Yarmouth, King's Lynn, Hull and Newcastle, if we're going towards the north and northeast, and at Southampton, Dartmouth, Plymouth, Topsham, and even Waterford if we want to go west. Although if we want to include the Channel crossing, and of course bearing in mind English Calais, we should be doing that, there was that equally short voyage that took Dover mariners to supplying both English Calais and the march around it. And this included actually a lot of livestock. Again, we were talking about sheep this morning, but there's a lot of livestock went over from the Kent ports to the garrison at Calais. They certainly dined well. However, for those who did engage in overseas trade, they also went to some ports in France, including Bordeaux, as well as you would expect, the Low Countries. And this is in contrast to Sandwich, so I'll just throw this in. Whereas as a port, its trading links stretched from the Hanseatic ports of the Baltic in the north to the Italian cities of Genoa and Venice in the south. So what I'm hoping we'll do is that our exhibition banner for this topic will include a map indicating the ports linked to Dover through trade. Also, what I want to, within this, is to think about these Dover ships and what they were carrying in the way of cargo. They were bringing in, for example, salt and wine from France, more exotic foodstuffs such as figs and raisins, and saffron, by the way, while Newcastle sea coal was similarly important. And like East Kent generally, Dover's hinterland was a rich mixed farming area, which meant it was in a strong position to be a major supplier of grain and livestock to Calais and elsewhere. And firewood too was in considerable demand. And Kent's woodlands were a great source of billets as well as providing timber, because it's worth remembering that this period, this sort of late 15th going into the 16th, was a time when the layout of houses changed. You've got the introduction of fireplaces and chimneys, and that had far-reaching consequences for the layout of the house and therefore the quantity of fuel required in domestic and industrial settings. Other cargoes that they would have carried would be raw materials and manufactured goods, particularly woolen cloth. We'll also want to try and identify some of these Dover mariners. So again, just like Maria, we want to put names to these things. Naming is important, both in terms of the actual captains of the ships, the merchants, and actually the names of their ships, which are also interesting. So we're hoping to sort of showcase all of this within our banner. So that's the sort of thing for that one, and we will repeat that for the other banners as well. So what about the workshops? Well, for the Working with Wills workshop, as I've said, we want to provide research skills for our participants, in addition to the excitement of working with primary sources. Yes, it's great to have everything printed, but it is so much more exciting when you actually go and look at the real thing, even if it's a photocopy. Because how you look at it will be different to how anybody else has probably looked at it before. Now, I haven't completely decided on which wills I'm going to use, but a will by John Pocock, which actually is not this one, because I only have got my notes from that particular will, looks very promising. Not least because he was a parishioner at St Mary's, where we'll be holding the workshops. Moreover, his will offers a series of bequests that will link to the exhibition, and it's one of the earliest Dover wills that's in English rather than Latin. So it's about the year 1500, which is slightly later than some of the other Kent ports. Faversham is really interesting because a lot of its wills go into English about 50 years earlier. So I'll use the first part of the workshop to introduce participants to wills as a primary source. Who made them, when, where and why, and the role of the diocesan courts regarding probate. Then we'll look at a photocopy of a will, and let's say it's John Pocock's. Although this may be daunting at first, I have a useful handout showing a range of individual letter forms, as well as common abbreviations and contractions that scribes used when they were writing out documents. Participants will be able to use these as crib sheets during the workshop and will be able to take them away afterwards, which hopefully will help them in the future as they develop their research skills, because they will be able to go back to the actual sources. And that's important. Now, of course, some people will find reading late medieval handwriting far easier than others. And if you're interested, it's secretary hand. But that's not a problem. And the key is practice, preferably frequently for short periods. And the incentive of doing it for your own or a collective project is a real driver in terms of actually getting into such things. So hopefully we'll transcribe at least part of the will. And this is the sorts of things we will come up with. We'll be linking to the idea of burial, because John Pocock wanted to be buried in St Mary's Church next to Margaret, his wife. He left to the high altar for his tithes forgotten 5 shillings, which was a large sum of money. He also left for church repairs 6 shillings and 8pence. And it's not really surprising, considering if they were going to have to dig up in the actual church itself to bury him, the church would have therefore wanted some money towards that. So not surprising. For his funeral, he wanted 20 masses said. At his month's mind, so that's 30 days after, he wanted 30 masses, and that's pretty standard, but it is interesting nevertheless. And on the anniversary of his death, he wanted another 30 masses, as well as the curate to sing for his soul, giving the curate 3 shillings and 4pence. And of course, all of you will know that is linked to the mark at 13 shillings and 4pence. Personal piety is one of those things that you can really work on using wills. And John Pocock is no exception. He left money to lights, to saints within the church. Yes, to Our Lady, as you would expect, but also to the cross light, to the light of St John the Baptist, St Anne, St Christopher, St Catherine, St Jacob, and St Ninian. Not a usual saint, but interesting nonetheless. And they each were to receive 12 pence, in other words, a shilling, whereas St Anthony's light was only to get 8pence. His executors, his wife, his brother Robert, and Nicholas Templeman, were to set up a temporary chantry in St Mary's Church. In other words, a priest was to pray every day for their souls and presumably to say a requiem mass for half a year. And there were to be 2 wax tapers at his grave, one at his head and one at his foot. And they too were to burn for half a year. There was also a reversionary bequest, whereby after the death of his wife, Joanna, and if his daughter Agnes died without legitimate heirs, then the residue of his goods, lands and tenements were to be sold, and the money used for a priest to sing for his soul, the souls of his parents, for the souls of his wife's parents, and the souls of all his good friends. He also remembered 2 religious houses. Dover Priory was to receive 20 shillings to sing for his soul, and Langdon Abbey another 20 shillings also to sing for his soul. We can also link him to the fishing industry. His brother Robert was to receive a fare of fishing nets. And a fare is a man's fare, which was the equivalent of a crewman's share of the catch, Just as today fishermen work out how much they will each get when they come back to port, because they work it out on a share system. There was a share system at work in late medieval Kent in the same way. So you have effectively a sleeping partner, in so much as if you provided a man's fair share of nets, you got a share of the catch. He also was linked to mariners. His brother Robert was to receive his quarter share of a ship called the Trinity. Now, a quarter share is actually quite good. Shares of ships in Dover go down to a 16th. So from that point of view, it was well worth having. If we're thinking about households, he lived in a messuage in Beckin or Biggin Street, which was to go to Agnes, his daughter. He also had another messuage in the same street, but it wasn't actually next door. What it was next door to his brother Robert's house in the same street. So again, we've got family connections building up topographically as well as in relation to actual goods given. So we can link people that way. And that the messuage that was next door to his brother Robert's was to go to John Pocock, our John's godson and nephew. So we've got a family presence in that part of Dover. In other words, on the road between Dover and Canterbury going up to London. We also know about his house, some of his household goods. He had a feather bed and all that belongs to it. He had 6 cushions. So that gives us an idea of the fixtures and fittings within the house. It's not much, but it's better than nothing, and you can work with that. He also had some utensils. He had 2 mazer bowls, and I can get very excited about mazer bowls, but I won't today. He had 2 goblets, a piece of silver, a salt cellar, 12 silver spoons, and a garnish of pewter. And all that was to go to Agnes at her marriage. So that idea of the bottom drawer, the dower that was going to the daughter, is very much within the will. So we're looking at longevity from that point of view. In terms of his clothing, he left his russet gown furred with fox to his brother Robert, whereas a tawny gown and a worsted tunic was to go to a named person at Northbourne. So his bequests are giving us an idea about his wealth, his status, his relationships. So we can then start thinking about things like network analysis and topography. We can talk about community. We can talk about kin, neighbours and friends. He also had land beyond Dover. So he had 2 acres at Sibbotston, an acre at Winter Hill, 15 acres at Farthing Low, 6 acres at Charlton Dane, and at least 11.5 acres at Guston. So we can place him not only in Dover but in the hinterland. Also an important factor. We can link him through the money he gives. So we've got close kin, his sister and his nieces, his 3 nieces. And also we can link to his household. He gives money to his servant. And then more broadly or more widely, he gave money to friends, neighbours and more distant kin. So we can use all these things as a way of actually getting some idea about John Pocock. Even with just one will, we can explore a variety of research questions. We can build up a body of evidence, if we're looking at lots of wills, that's quantitative and qualitative. We can look at the relation to the type of topics within the exhibition. We can link them. We can link them topographically and through networks, through relationships, through reciprocity, and these ideas about past cultures and societies and how they will resonate with society today. So it's trying to bring those together. It's trying to bridge several hundred years without being simplistic. So we're trying to nuance this. We're not saying that, you know, everything was the same, but at least if we can try and get some idea of what it might have been like in late 15th century Dover, we've got somewhere. So wills, I think, are a very good first source for people who want to work on primary documents. They offer immediacy, although that can be deceptive. You've got to be careful. But they, you know, as long as you make people aware of the limitations as well as the advantages, you're okay. They can give you insights into certain topics. And I think hopefully that by using the workshops, that we will give an opportunity to people to go on, hopefully, and go and join people like Martin and others within the town to go and explore more about their town's past. So thank you very much.